Donald Trump's meetings with world leaders have always been known for their drama and often for being awkward to watch. From his tense talks with Ukraine's President Zelensky to moments where European leaders corrected him publicly, his international meetings rarely end smoothly. Each one seems to create headlines for the wrong reasons. And his latest meeting with Australia's Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, was no different. In fact, this one was even stranger. What was supposed to be a calm, diplomatic press conference quickly turned into something more like an on-camera meltdown. Standing beside one of America's closest allies, Trump's behavior left many wondering, is this just his usual style? Or is there something deeper going on? Whatever the case, the world watched a former president drift further away from the image of calm leadership. It all began innocently enough. Cameras flashed, reporters prepared their questions, and Prime Minister Albanese smiled politely. But instead of starting with serious remarks, Trump commented on a reporter's haircut, laughing and joking about maybe trying that style himself. The room went quiet. The Prime Minister smiled awkwardly, unsure what to say. That one strange moment set the tone for everything that followed. This wasn't going to be diplomacy. It was going to be improvisation. Then came the first real question. Why wasn't the U.S. offering more support to Ukraine or tougher sanctions against Vladimir Putin? Instead of giving a clear answer, Trump brushed it off, saying the reporter didn't understand the situation. Rather than explaining policy, he shifted into dismissive remarks, a move critics say he often uses when faced with difficult questions, especially from women reporters. Next, an Australian journalist asked about trade. He noted that the U.S. already has a strong trade surplus with Australia. So why was Trump imposing new tariffs on an ally? Instead of responding directly, Trump went off on a tangent about airplanes, how Australia buys many of them, how American planes are the best, and how Boeing builds beautiful jets. He repeated the same points several times, never really answering the question. The Prime Minister stood quietly, perhaps wondering how to bring the conversation back to reality. By then, it was clear that Trump wasn't focused on trade, or diplomacy, or even facts. He was focused on applause, even when no one in the room was clapping. And then, out of nowhere, he claimed he had personally ended 8 wars in 8 months. That one line immediately went viral online. For many watching, it wasn't just another odd moment, it was a worrying sign of how far things had drifted from normal presidential behavior. Whether you admire or criticize him, it's hard to deny that Trump's recent appearances have raised serious questions about focus, leadership, and credibility on the world stage. No one really knows what wars Donald Trump was talking about. There are no records of peace treaties, no confirmations from other world leaders, and no official documents that back up his claim. Yet, he said it as if it were a major accomplishment. He even added that no other U.S. president had ever done the same, a statement that left many wondering if he was simply inventing achievements to sound more successful than reality allows. It wasn't confidence people were seeing. It was something closer to delusion. When a leader starts changing history in real time, the issue isn't just exaggeration, it's a complete disconnect from reality. Then came a question about the Middle East, the ongoing conflict, the collapse of a ceasefire, and the rising number of civilian deaths. Instead of showing empathy or seriousness, Trump smiled and claimed that there was peace in the Middle East for the first time ever. The press fell silent. Peace, while missiles are flying and families are fleeing their homes. He even claimed to have made a deal with Hamas and warned that if they broke it, the U.S. would wipe them out. It sounded less like a leader discussing a humanitarian crisis and more like someone narrating an action movie. There was no mention of Israel's military strikes, no talk of the victims, and no effort to explain the complexity of the situation. Instead, Trump turned it into another moment of self-praise, insisting everything was under control when, in truth, the region was still in chaos. Things got even more tense when an Australian journalist asked why it had taken 9 months for Trump to finally meet Prime Minister Albanese. The reporter also mentioned rumors that Trump wasn't fond of Australia's ambassador, who had once criticized him publicly. You could see Trump's expression change immediately. He interrupted before the question was even finished, asking if the ambassador had really said something bad about him, even wondering aloud if the man should apologize. It was awkward and petty. turning what should have been a diplomatic conversation into a personal grudge match. The Prime Minister looked visibly uncomfortable as the room fell silent. That's when it became clear Trump doesn't see allies. He sees critics. And in his world, critics must always be punished. A few minutes later came one of the most shocking exchanges. A reporter asked about the war in Ukraine, the biggest conflict in Europe since World War II, and Trump casually replied, "It doesn't affect us in any way." He said it as if he were talking about the weather, showing no sign of concern or understanding of the global impact. That one sentence rang like an alarm bell for U.S. allies. It suggested that under Trump, America might step back from its traditional role as a dependable partner. For decades, the U.S. has been seen as the cornerstone of Western democracy, a country that stands by its friends. But under Trump, that sense of reliability feels uncertain, as if the ship has lost its captain. When asked whether he believed Ukraine could still win the war, Trump shrugged and said, "They could still win, but I don't think they will." That wasn't leadership. It was defeatism disguised as realism. Every time he casts doubt on Ukraine's chances, it sends the wrong message to Russia, encouragement instead of deterrence. Then came the question about China and the AUKUS alliance, a security partnership between the US, the UK, and Australia. When asked if this alliance could prevent China from attacking Taiwan, Trump brushed it off, saying he didn't think China would try anything. He insisted that America was strong and that nobody would mess with us. But then he added something bizarre, that Taiwan is the apple of Xi's eye. It was the same strange phrase he had once used to describe Putin's interest in Ukraine, as if invasions were just expressions of affection. For such a serious topic, his language sounded naive and shallow. And of course, Trump couldn't resist taking shots at his predecessors. While standing next to one of America's closest allies, he called the previous president incompetent and praised himself in comparison. The diplomats in the room looked visibly uncomfortable, because when you attack your own leaders in front of others, you don't project confidence, you show division. And that, more than anything else, is why so many world leaders have lost trust in him. Then, Trump went off on another unexpected tangent, this time predicting that China's economy would collapse. He claimed that China was in deep trouble and might not even survive as a major power. But critics say this sounded more like projection than analysis. Because right now, it's actually the U.S. economy that's under strain, weighed down by trade wars, political division, and instability, much of which began during Trump's own administration. It's as if he's describing his own mistakes, but pointing the camera somewhere else. And if you need proof that this kind of chaos spreads, just look at his team. Recently, his press secretary responded to a serious policy question from a journalist with a childish comeback, something like, "Your mom did." That's not humor. That's the tone coming from the highest levels of his operation. Immature, defensive, and unprofessional. There's a saying, the fish rots from the head first. And in this case, that attitude seems to have filtered through the entire team. Behind the scenes, reports suggest that some of America's closest allies have started quietly distancing themselves. Intelligence agencies in Europe, including those in the Netherlands and Canada, are said to have scaled back cooperation with Washington. They worry that sensitive information could be leaked or used for political purposes. The world is watching, and the stability that once defined American leadership now seems to be cracking. And every time Trump steps to a microphone, that crack grows wider. So here's the real takeaway. This wasn't just a bad press conference. It was a global warning. It reminded everyone that democracy's biggest threat doesn't always come from outside. Sometimes it comes from within, from a podium, a microphone, and a leader who can't stop promoting himself. And that's where this story ends, for now.